Hello and welcome. In a world full of commentators and thinkers, few people are as respected as our guest today. Though he dismisses being voted the world's #1 intellectual and plays down having his book endorsed at the UN General Assembly by Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez to great applause, Noam Chomsky continues to be a highly quoted intellectual force. The professor of linguistics at Boston's prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, now approaching 80, first made a name for himself with his remarkable work on the theory of grammar in the 1950s, but later became known for his political activism, particularly his persistently anti-war stance. And don't forget, we take your calls on this show. The numbers are at the bottom of your screen. The New York Times described him as arguably the most important intellectual alive, and we're pleased to have him with us. Honored to have you with us, Professor Chomsky.
Very glad to be with you.
Well, sir, I know you have no problem in telling it as it is and being very direct. So let me first get your impression on the expression war on terror.
Well, first of all, it's worth remembering that the war on terror, so-called, was redeclared in 2001, not declared. It was declared 20 years earlier when President Reagan came into office and announcing, he and his associates, that a prime focus of U.S. foreign policy would be state-directed international terrorism, international terrorism generally, which they described as the plague of the modern age, return to barbarism in our times, and so on. And in reaction to it, they launched what turned out to be a horrendous terrorist war, which destroyed much of Central America and spread to much of the rest of the world. So the war was redeclared on 2001, and it's not a war on terror. In fact, it's been plain from the actions that were taken that the goal of reducing terror is not a high priority. In fact, some of the most significant actions have, as anticipated, increased the threat of terror quite substantially, in fact.
So let me ask
take a look at the.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, if you look at the leading international affairs journal in the United States, Foreign Affairs, the main journal, one of the lead stories in the current issue is about how much the invasion of Iraq strengthened Al-Qaeda. A study that just came out by two leading terrorism experts using mostly government data concluded that what they call the Iraq effect, the effect of Iraq on terror, has been to increase terror 7-fold. That's quite an increase, and there are other examples.
So what would you have said would be a more appropriate response to the attacks of September the 11th? You wrote about 9/11, your book 9/11, it's called 9/11. I wonder what you think would have been the best and most appropriate response for the US following those attacks then?
Well, those are criminal actions. Serious criminal actions, and when criminal actions take place, what you do is investigate to find out who is responsible. When you have good evidence as to who is responsible, you apprehend them. If it's an international matter, as this was, international security forces, probably police would be best, could be used to apprehend them, bring them to justice, and try them. That's one aspect. Another, if you're serious about it, is to try to ask what the goal and purpose of the terror was and where it's coming from. And what you regularly discover, it's been discussed over and over again by specialists on terror, what you find is that the terrorists see themselves as a kind of a vanguard who are trying to mobilize others on the basis of real grievances. They're trying to show that the grievances are felt and they're real, and they want to try to get people to join their cause by dramatic acts like terror. Well, if you want to stop terror, what you do is pay attention to the grievances and see if they're legitimate. If they're legitimate, then deal with them. That will reduce the likelihood of that the terrorists can in fact mobilize the forces, the groups that they're aiming at. In the case of September 11th, I think there's by now pretty good evidence that that could have been done. Right. The major studies of the jihadi movements, like Fawaz Girgiz's excellent books, have shown that, and others too, have shown that The 9/11 style terror, Al-Qaeda terror, was quite unpopular. In fact, elicited bitter critique right inside the jihadi movement. Okay, that gave an opportunity to use both the means of criminal investigation, yes, and apprehension, but also to address the grievances, exploit the differences that developed, and separate the terrorist groups from the reservoir of support they're hoping to mobilize.
Well, Professor, one thing, you live in the United States, you call it your home, and yet you also call it a failed state. You believe it's a failed state. Now, I wonder why.
Well, actually, that's not quite true. I said that it's beginning to take on some of the characteristics of failed states. And it is. I've gone through the reasons. I could repeat them. And that's all the more reason for me to be concerned about it, the fact that I live here and it's my country. Sure, you're particularly interested in the places you care about and can't care about anything more than your own country.
Now, interestingly enough, in your recent book, Perilous Power, The Middle East and U.S. Foreign Policy, which you co-authored with Gilbert Achcar, you both support the idea that a major deterrent to democracy, especially in a place like the Middle East, is that the United States is actually opposed to it, which sort of contradicts the U.S. statements that come out of the government that say we are trying to promote democracy around the world.
Well, first of all, you should time those statements about promoting democracy carefully. Of course, there's always talk about promoting democracy. That's everybody always talks about that, but it's boilerplate. Didn't mean anything. When the invasion of Iraq was being planned and sort of sold to the country and to Congress, it was on the basis of what President Bush repeatedly called a single question: will Saddam Hussein terminate his programs of developing weapons of mass destruction? That was the question. That was the basis on which Congress approved the use of force. That was actually even the official internal motivation. Weapons of mass destruction, Saddam's ties to terror. Well, a couple of months after the invasion, the single question was answered definitively the wrong way. We know the answer. After that, months after that, the president announced what he called his freedom agenda. This is November 2003, to great fanfare. The freedom agenda is the real goals were to bring democracy to Iraq, to the Middle East, to the world. Nobody can take this seriously, of course, and interestingly, in Iraq they didn't take it seriously. Shortly after the president's November declarations, big headlines, a lot of excitement, a Gallup poll was released that had been taken in Baghdad. 1% of the population felt the United States invaded to bring democracy. 5% felt that the United States invaded to help Iraqis. Most of the rest concluded the obvious, which we all know, but we're not allowed to say.
Well, Professor?
Furthermore,
Sorry. Yeah, a quick question, sir, based on what you just said there. I want to get to you. It's an email that came in from Mauritania. I just pick up on what you were talking about there. Safia Amar asks, don't you think that the U.S. policy in Iraq and Afghanistan is only triggering more hatred in the Arab and Islamic world? What would you suggest to limit those effects?
It's not just I think. It is definite. Steady studies are coming out. Another one just came out a few days ago from major polling institutions, which are showing exactly what the questioner points out. Yes, fear and hatred of the United States is growing. In fact, not just in the Islamic world, even in Europe, which is the region most sympathetic to the United States. The effect of George Bush's policies, particularly the invasion of Iraq, has been to raise the United States to the most feared country in the world. What should be done to alleviate this? First of all, to terminate the actions that are causing it, and then to deal with the real issues. Like, it would be a great thing if the United States were to support democracy, but it doesn't. And we know that. It didn't do it before 9/11, it doesn't do it now. If you want to, maybe the most dramatic example is Palestine. There were elections in Palestine in January 2006. Free elections, carefully monitored, everybody agreed they were free. The population voted the wrong way, not the way the U.S. wanted. How did the U.S. react?
Right.
The U.S., with Europe trailing behind, immediately moved to punish the population severely for voting the wrong way.
Well, sir,
how can you look at that and say they're trying to promote democracy?
We got a call in just now from Anwar in London. He's on the line if he might ask his question of you. Anwar, go ahead.
Oh, hi, assalamu alaikum. Good evening. I just like to ask, why is it that Democrats now they have passed a bill and Bush and his hawks and his colleagues are stuck to the same old policy that war must continue, the killing must continue. I think it is time enough British, American, and the civilians, which are in thousands of Iraqis, have been killed. I think the American people should come out and speak, and we must bring it to an end now, I think.
Okay, Anwar, let's get Professor Chomsky to answer this. Perhaps I can ask it in this way, sir. What is it that stops the American people having some kind of voice in this? If Anwar is correct that people are against the killing that's going on, why is it that the views of people are not being translated into action in terms of policies?
Well, now we're back to the matter of failed states. Not just on this issue, but on a whole range of crucial issues. Public opinion is pretty strongly opposed to government policy. In fact, on many issues, important ones, both political parties are well to the right of the general population. That's true on domestic issues too. It's been pretty well documented. I've written a lot about it, so have others. That's a failure of the functioning of the American democratic system. It's a very free country, freest country in the world, has formal democratic institutions, but for a variety of reasons, they are not functioning in ways which make them responsive to the public. And the public knows it. That's one of the reasons there's so much disillusionment with the political system. Now, why doesn't the public do something about it? Well, that's a function of atomization of people, of difficult economic circumstances, not difficult by world standards, but difficult by the standards that they rightly expect and see, and a lack of breakdown of the major organizations. The unions, for example, used to be a major force for democratization, but they've been harshly repressed. They by now barely exist. Illegal labor practices are used to destroy them, and so on. And the result is a society which is opposed to policy on major issues like this one, but hasn't found the organizational forms, hasn't developed the organizational forms to press for a real voice in foreign policy, or domestic policy for that matter.
Right, Professor, you'd mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian situation a moment ago before Anwar's question, and I want to get an email to you that came from Andrew Leidner in the United States, who says, "You are Jewish. If Israel is destroyed, what part will you have played in it, and will you give yourself a pat on the back when it is?"
Well, I've felt for many years, and have written incidentally, that the people who call themselves supporters of Israel are in reality supporters of Israel's moral degeneration and probably ultimate destruction. Israel can have security. In fact, that's been true for over 30 years. It has chosen instead expansion at the cost of security. I can go through the reasons if you want to know
Probably
the
we're short on
details,
time and a couple of callers waiting, so better to...
Okay, but that means that, I agree with my Israeli friends who think that the policies they're taking are extremely first of all, wrong, but also self-destructive, and that if they do pursue security and peace instead of expansion and oppression, their prospects are very much improved.
Naveed's on the line from London. Naveed, what would you like to ask Professor Chomsky?
Hi, Mr. Chomsky. I'm a great fan of yours. I have two questions to ask you. The first one is basically the UK government and the US government have this term war on terror. A lot of people have equated the term war on terror to a war on Islam, but this has been denied by George Bush, Mr. Blair. If there was to be a war on Islam, what would it be like, and what would one be? So if someone was to implement a war on Islam, what would that be, and the difference between that and this? And my second question really is, I've read a lot of your articles. As I said, I'm a big fan, and I would like to, as a Muslim, invite you to Islam. But and just to say, feel free to read as many books. as possible.
Naveed, okay, we've got less than a minute now for Professor Chomsky to ask. Apart from the offer to convert to Islam, Professor, you have the question about what would a war against Islam be like if it was to take place? Very briefly, sir.
War on Islam would be, Third World War, might bring the species to an end. But the United States is not engaged in a war against Islam. George Bush is correct. It's, for example, that the oldest and most valued ally of the United States in the region is Saudi Arabia, because that's where most of the oil is. It happens to be an extreme Islamic fundamentalist state. In the 1980s, during the first so-called war on terror, the United States, the government, was fighting a war largely, to a large extent, against the Catholic Church, which was sponsoring liberation theology.
Professor, I have to forgive you for interrupting, and forgive me for interrupting, and ask you to come back sometime soon to join us on more debate, but thank you very much for being with us for now.
Thank you.
On Monday's show, we'll look at the plight of Iraq's refugees and find out why some of them are being denied entry into the United States. Do send in your questions about that. Riz at aljazeera.net is the address, and we'll see you soon. Street Talk's coming up next.